Guys, we're almost done, can you believe it? With Naya Nuki, the Shoshone girl who ran. We're on chapter 14 today, and I know you're thinking, what can I read next? He does have a lot of other books that you can check out, and you can read them as well. This is just one. I believe this was his first book that he wrote. But, as you know, I've also showed you a couple others, Sonti Token and Om Costo. Check them out at the local library, also available on Amazon. Let's get started. Stopped. Naya Nuki continued on her journey, looking for fresh signs. She found another camp, the willow frameworks of more huts still standing, but she could tell it was not a fresh camp. The weather worsened as the day wore on. Snow began to fall. Naya Nuki stopped. She sensed that this was not just a brief snow shower. Quickly she turned back to the willow frames and hurried to make a storm-proof hut. Her hands were skilled at weaving new willow branches very tightly through the framework of an old hut. She left the leaves on the branches to seal most of the cracks in the hut would shed the snow and rain. Around the sides of the hut, she wove tight walls and put several extra layers of branches on top of the hut, making them hang down over the sides for added protection. Naya Nuki worked on building Snowstorm, and soon the ground was covered with a white blanket. After the repairs were completed, a very cold Naya Nuki went on digging roots and gathering dried berries from nearby serviceberry bushes. The snow was ankle deep, and she crawled inside her snug little hut with her supply of roots and berries and other belongings. There was still plenty of daylight, but the storm made travel impossible and dangerous. Mountain storms could last for days and dump 2 or 3 feet of snow in one day. The high winds would whip up drifts more than 10 feet deep. The storm raged on all afternoon and into the night. Naya Nuki was cozy and warm in her willow hut. She came out once in a while for a look. Her hut was covered with snow, but inside it was still dry and much warmer than the outside. Naya Nuki lay in her buffalo hide, enjoying her berries and roots. She even slept on and off. The night seemed long and still. The snow-covered hut cut out all the outside sounds as the storm continued all night long. Naya Nuki did not know when daylight came. She was asleep in the darkness of her hut. Her doorway was blocked with a deep drift of snow, but she did wake up. She dug her way out and was amazed to see so much snow. It was still snowing heavily. The snow was more than knee-deep, and some drifts were shoulder-high. Naya Nuki returned to her hut, realizing she was trapped and could not move from her shelter without risking her life. Would this be the end of her journey? Would this have to be her home for the winter, alone, without help? Would she die here, so close to home and safety? What would she do? Naya Nuki knew any decision could mean her life or her death. Naya Nuki sat in her hut, measuring her supply of roots and berries. How long could she last? Could she get more food? Enough to survive? She carefully divided her food into small piles, each one representing one day's supply. Each pile was a tiny amount, just enough to keep her alive from day to day. Naya Nuki counted the piles. There were only 8, but somehow she would manage. No, nothing would stop her from reaching her people. She had been through too much to fail now. Naya Nuki spent her time inside her hut, coming out often to see the snow was still coming down. It seemed the storm would never end. Night came, then another day, and another night, as the storm raged on. Naya Nuki was patient. She could not leave the shelter or her hut until she was sure it was possible to move on safely. After 3 long days, the storm finally had passed. The snow was 42 inches deep, and the level on the drifts were 7 or 8 feet high in places. Naya Nuki made a path around her buried hut. She had felt like a prisoner during the storm. It was still impossible to move very far. Naya Nuki looked about. At a distance, a half-mile, stood a clump of tall cottonwood trees. After careful thought, she decided to make a path to the trees. The trees would give her a chance to climb above the snowdrifts for a better view of her surroundings. Something had to be done to find a way out of this white prison. Naya Nuki began the long struggle to reach the trees. The deep snow was wet and heavy. She stamped it down as she moved forward. It was exhausting work. She stopped often to rest and catch her breath. In some places the snow was over her head and very hard to pack down. Naya Nuki was getting wet and cold. Several times she went back to her hut to get warm, but she did not give up. She would not give up. She must make it to the trees. Somehow she knew the climb to the top of one of those trees would help her escape this prison of deep snow. It took Naya Nuki most of the day to reach the trees, which were further than she had first thought at first. She was so tired that she knew she would have to wait until morning to make the climb up safely. It was getting dark. The light would be better in the morning. Wearily, Naya Nuki walked through her long ditch in the snow back to her hut. Her main worry was the wind. If the wind blew hard during the night, her path could be completely filled in by morning, and all her work would have to be done again. She lay down in her hut to eat and sleep, hoping the wind would not blow while she slept. Each time Naya Nuki woke up during the night, she listened. Each time she heard no wind. The night was calm. Morning came, with the day bright and clear. It was very cold. It took a while for Naya Nuki's eyes to adjust to the brightness of the sun on the pure white snow. In the bitter cold, Naya Nuki walked to the cottonwood trees. She picked one of the tallest trees that was also the easiest to climb, and started up the lower branches. Taking care not to fall, Naya Nuki reached the top safely. She had a good view of the entire valley, and she could see for miles. She quickly looked around, studying the area for any signs of life, and then began a slower, more careful survey of the valley and the mountainsides surrounding it. On her second search of the valley, Naya Nuki's eyes caught the sight of a long, dark shadow in the distant snow. It looked like a track, much like the path she had made to this tree. This direction was southeast. It was impossible to tell what kind of tracks these were, or even the direction of travel of whatever had made the tracks. At least there were tracks. There was a sign of life. This gave Naya Nuki hope. Naya Nuki sat on the branch, her eyes glued to the exciting discovery. She began thinking, these could be the tracks of elk or deer moving in the winter range in the lower valleys. They could be the tracks of enemy warriors, and they could just be the tracks of her people. Naya Nuki was so excited that she felt like moving towards the tracks immediately, but she had learned from experience that it is better to wait, to think things through, then choose the best plan and follow it carefully. She did not want to make a mistake now. She was so close to her goal. Naya Nuki decided to stay in the tree and watch the tracks patiently. She had the urge to start toward the tracks immediately, but decided to wait and watch instead. The sun warmed the cold air as the morning wore on. Naya Nuki studied the distance between her tree and the tracks. In the direct line, the snow was very deep, but off to her left she saw a slight ridge curve towards the tracks. She knew the snow would not be as deep as the crest of this small ridge, and even though the distance would be further, the snow would be much easier to travel through. That would be her route when she did leave the tracks. Naya Nuki decided to stay on the tree until sun was directly overhead. Then she would begin to make her way towards the tracks. They might give her a chance to escape the snowbound valley. She would head for the tracks, whether she saw anything or not. Naya Nuki did not take her eyes off the tracks in the distance. By the middle of the morning, Naya Nuki was weary of sitting in her high perch. Suddenly her eye caught a movement, and she raised herself to her feet on the high branches for a better look. Something was moving along the track. She watched anxiously, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a horse and rider, then another and another. Naya Nuki strained to see anything that would tell her whether the riders were friends or enemies, but it was impossible to tell from that distance. She watched as more than 20 riders moved slowly south along the snowy track. Naya Nuki's excitement increased as she saw others walking behind the riders. Some of those who were walking were leading horses, and some were women and children. These could be her own people heading to their winter home from the buffalo hunt, but it was late in the year to be returning from the hunt. They could be members of the warring tribe, but they would not have women and children with them. No, this was a peaceful tribe. Women and children never traveled with the war parties. Naya Nuki would follow them and get close enough to find out. She quickly climbed down from the tree, gathered up her belongings, and started the difficult struggle to reach the tracks. The tracks were 3 or 4 miles away. Naya Nuki worked her way slowly through the deep snow to the low ridge she had seen from her perch high in the cottonwood tree. It took her a long time to reach the ridge. At the base of the ridge, the snow had drifted so deep that it was over her head. It was almost dark when she reached the crest of the ridge, where the snow was only a foot to 18 inches deep. Naya Nuki did not stop when darkness came. The sky was clear, and a bright moon shone down, lighting the snow-covered land. Naya Nuki followed the crest to the ridge and made better time. The snow did not build up on the crest as it did on the flat ground. Still, the travel was slow and tiring. In some places, the ridge dipped down, and the snow was much deeper. Naya Nuki was traveling only half a mile each hour, but was making steady progress toward the trail made by the riders. The night wore on. The moon worked its way across the sky. Now Naya Nuki was struggling hard to keep going. She forced her weary legs to take each step. Often she had to stop, gasping for breath, and waiting for renewed energy to go on. When the moon went down, the darkness forced Naya Nuki to stop. Soon she was digging at the snowdrift for shelter to make a place to rest while she waited for the daylight to come. Her snow cave was welcomed relief from her exhausting day and night of travel through the snow. Naya Nuki was too tired to sleep. She rubbed her sore legs, ate some roots and berries, and stretched out in her buffalo hide to rest. Her rabbit fur moccasins felt good on her cold, wet feet. She dozed a little, but did not really sleep. And that will do it for chapter 14. We are only one chapter away from finishing the book. Now, go in and answer your questions. Use complete sentences. Make sure you click submit. Hard, right? Have a great day, guys. See you tomorrow.